Well, happy Cinco de Mayo. This day commemorates Mexico's successful defense of its sovereignty against invading French troops at the town of Puebla on May 5th, 1862. It is widely celebrated by Mexican immigrants and Mexican Americans, and many of us who are native born here have learned that it's a good day to party. But it is not the Independence Day for Mexico, which is on September 16th. And Ignacio Gonzalez writes that Cinco de Mayo is not celebrated in Mexico to the same extent that it is in the United States, mainly because September 16th is seen as a more important holiday. The reason that Chicanos celebrated the holiday is that we appreciate its cultural significance, victory in the face of great odds, and the patriotism it generated, more than its historical relevance. Also, General Ignacio Zaragoza, the leader at La Batalla de Puebla, was born in Texas while it was still part of Mexico. For this reason, he is considered by many to be the first Chicano hero. Some scholars, including Jose Antonio Burciaga, believe that had the French defeated Mexico at Puebla, France would have aided the South in the American Civil War in order to see free southern ports from the Union blockade. During this time, the South was winning the war. General Robert E. Lee was enjoying success, and French intervention could have had a major impact on the future of our country. It seems people not of Mexican descent may also have an indirect reason to celebrate Cinco de Mayo. In America, we've become more aware of this holiday as the number of Mexican Americans and immigrants increase in this country. And this county is one of the fastest changing places in our whole country. According to census data, the Hispanic population in the USA is over 35 million people. It also determined that the Hispanic population now outnumbers African Americans, making it the largest minority in the United States. As of September 2001, the Hispanic population in North Carolina exceeded 617,000. This is the Hispanic community with the fastest growth rate in the USA. The 1990 census counted only 2,102 Hispanics in Forsyth County. Now the numbers are over 20,000. Most have come here for economic reasons, to do the jobs that most Americans refuse to do. They're often exploited by employers who do not comply with safety and labor laws. Many immigrants do not report abuse for fear of being sent back. Even those who are here legally do not make waves because many of their family members are here illegally. But we must remember that even illegal immigrants are here by invitation. If American companies weren't hiring, nobody would be immigrating. The demographics have changed over the past decade. In 1993, the majority Hispanics in Forsyth County were bilingual, legal, and from many different countries. For the most part, they were married and educated. The recent influx has been from the poorest segment of the Mexican population. Their literacy in Spanish is lower than the national average in Mexico. They face much more difficulty adjusting to our culture than did their predecessors. How do we, as Unitarian Universalists, respond to this change? Many churches in the area have responded with an evangelical outreach. Naturally, the Catholic Church has a Hispanic outreach program, for a great majority of Hispanics are Catholic, but there's also a rise in Pentecostal Christianity amongst this population, and mainstream congregations such as Methodist host the Hispanic Action Office and offer Spanish worship services. Some argue that it's pointless for Unitarian Universalists to evangelize because many Hispanics are uneducated and predominantly Catholic. But that's not an excuse. Sure, only a small percentage of Hispanics will find a religious home here, but really only a small percentage of white English-speaking Americans find their home here. So even more important than evangelizing is to live our UU principles in the face of changing demographics. How will we live our first principle to respect the inherent worth and dignity of each new immigrant? How many of us will learn Spanish to help provide the services they need? How many of us will volunteer to teach English so that they may assimilate more quickly? How many of us will overcome our fear and anxiety of strangers by taking the risks to make them friends? Our second principle calls us to affirm justice, equity, and compassion. To this end, the All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church in Durham, the Eno River Fellowship in Durham, the church in Chapel Hill, the UU Church of Charlotte, as well as Valdosta, and the Unitarian Universalist Migrant Ministry of Greenville, North Carolina, have all come out in support of a boycott of Mount Olive pickles, of which I have 2 jars in my refrigerator as I speak. This action was organized by the Farm Labor Organizing Committee of the AFL-CIO. And they have successfully organized farm laborers who supply tomatoes to Campbell's and cucumbers to Vlasic. How we interact with the companies who use Hispanic labor might have an influence on their working conditions and their livelihood. It is something we as a people should look at. Our use of the democratic process might inspire us to organize voter registration drives and help immigrants navigate the pathway to American citizenship. These people contribute so much to our standard of living, yet they have little voice politically. Who will speak for them when they need health care and education? For me, the issues are so large and complex that I'm not prepared to make a rousing call to action to the congregation today. For myself, need more time to study and learn before I take action. Like several others in this congregation, I'm a member of Crossing 52. Now, the name of this organization comes from the geographical split between blacks and whites in this city. But with the rising Hispanic population, this dualistic thinking is fast becoming obsolete. Should it be Crossing 52 and somewhere around Wautown? I chose this day, Cinco de Mayo, to broach this topic. But that's only a Mexican-American holiday. The Hispanic community is much broader. Cubans have different issues and norms than Hondurans do, than Guatemalans, than do Peruvians. In my last congregation, there was a white woman married to a Peruvian-born husband whose grandfather had immigrated to Peru from Japan. how do they get classified? Even within the Mexican population, there is conflict between those of Spanish descent and those who come from the native people. In 1539, Hernando de Soto was the first European to explore what would later become North Carolina. Thus, the Spanish claim to our region is older than that of our English ancestors. Demographers predict that by 2050, white, non-Hispanic people will constitute less than 50% of the population of this country. If that seems like the distant future, 2050, just look at our youngest children. In our elementary school, white children, as they are currently defined, account for only 49.4% of the population. District-wide, 52.9% of the students are white, 35% are black, and about 8% Hispanic. Hal Woodward's elementary school off of Waughtown Street is already over 50% Hispanic. We need to seriously look at ourselves and redefine what is American. Waves of immigrants made this country. In my hometown, my generation was the first generation to speak English. The grandparents of many of my peers only spoke Polish. In World War I, German immigrants in the upper Midwest were sending relief to the war-torn home country, Germany. Citizens of this country, but sending relief packages to the country we were at war with. If you watch It's a Wonderful Life, as I'm sure we all have, the way that Italian Americans were considered in the earlier part of this century, before World War II especially, was almost identical to the way that Hispanics are being considered now. Somehow Italians have emigrated and become white. And that speaks to the flexibility of barriers in this country, that we need to find ways to not look at us and them and try to find ways that those who have differences are still part of us. Back at the turn of the century, transportation and communication and the fact that most of the immigrants came from across the Atlantic Ocean really facilitated assimilation. But the current wave of Hispanic immigrants do not have such barriers. That Cuba and Mexico are a lot closer than Germany and Italy and Ireland. And this creates such an incredible cross-pollination of cultures, where an Irish Catholic, Maria Shriver, is married to a Viennese immigrant, Arnold Schwarzenegger, whose movie catchphrase is, "Hasta la vista, baby." Salsa outsells ketchup in this country. Santana is no longer the only Latin pop star. And how many of us have eaten Mexican food in the past week? Change has already arrived. How will we get to know our new neighbors? There are organizations that can help us. The Hispanic League of the Piedmont Triad was established in March 1992 by several professionals in various fields, including business, law, medicine, religion, and education. The initial objective was to foster diversity and raise awareness by serving as a liaison between the corporate community and the fastest growing segment of the workforce, Hispanics. Their mission is to facilitate the inclusion, education, health, and well-being of Hispanics, Latinos, and to become advocates of Hispanic Latino issues within a diverse society while promoting mutual cultural understanding, dignity, and respect. One of the events that they sponsor is Bilingual Story Time, which is at the Southside Library on the second Monday of each month, or in Rinaldo Library at 7 o'clock on the fourth Tuesday of each month, and at the Kernersville Library. This is a time for us to take our children and learn with them, and they probably know more about crossing the cultural divide than us, and it's probably a time where we can learn from our children. The Hispanic Action Office was at the Central Methodist Church and on 3 East Devonshire Street, and I have some of this information out on the table by the membership, by the greeters table for those who want more of this information. And they are working on issues as diverse as domestic violence and how to get a driver's license. And they're opening a center on that location in June, and they are in need of volunteers. But if you think of any social agency in town, they need help providing to their Hispanic clients, whether it's crisis control, SCAN, Planned Parenthood, the hospitals. Almost anywhere you turn, or even right where you are, there is an opportunity to make a difference. But before we turn outward, I want us to take some time this morning to turn inside ourselves. And let us close our eyes and take a deep breath and think. Think of any time you felt like a stranger. Take yourself back to a place that was once unfamiliar. Look at the faces of the people you do not know. Who can you trust? They are speaking in jargon or perhaps an entirely different language. You do your best to be understood, but they just stare blankly at you, sometimes yelling. Think about doing a job you hate. You want to complain, but you need the money. You have good ideas, but they remain unexpressed. You fear being fired. You cannot find the words. You come home from work and you are too tired and sore to hug your family. Or maybe they are too far away. In the crowded city, you are alone. You rent a room, but you have no home. You wonder, why is it so hard? You need a kind word, a friendly face, a chance to make things better. Barely making a living, yet you dream of making your life better. When we find ourselves in that place where we strive for opportunity, we begin to understand the strangers at our door. I know this is a live issue for many in this congregation. We spoke about it and touched on it on a global perspective during the forum today. And as I left the forum to prepare for today's service, they were still talking, and I imagine there were still opinions that were left unsaid. For anybody at this time, just share your perspectives of what you see happening in our community and perhaps ways that we might respond.
Two things on this subject. First off, I work with Don Woodward with a small electronics plant over in Kernersville, and 80% of the people who work there are now Hispanic. They do a magnificent job. They toil with these little circuits under microscopes all day, and they police themselves. The owner of the company told me he loves these workers because if there's somebody who's goofing off, not doing right, or worrying the other workers or whatever, they police themselves and tell them not to come back the next day, and that worker disappears. They keep a very good shop that way. Now, on the other side of the coin, I'm really worried about a new profiling going on. Since profiling of black people has become illegal in police circles, Hispanic people are many times seen as white and put down as white. And now if you look at the city pages in the newspaper, which I like to do, it's a little hobby of mine I've done for the past 10 years to see who's been busted for drugs. It is now almost all Hispanic names. Of course, these people do have access in Mexico, bringing in marijuana, whatever, but they are getting arrested far more than blacks or people with white names. So it's very interesting to see this occur.
After you left the forum this morning, we had a lengthy, intense discussion about why most people have abandoned Lithuanian as a useful language, right? There are lots of important languages that are fading away, and Spanish. There are a lot of people that speak Spanish, and there are a lot of new Spanish newcomers. But to teach some of the senior people Spanish is a big effort. And wouldn't it be? It seems to me it would be much more useful to have English language classes for their Spanish friends. There are, last time I looked, was like 500,000 English words. In Spanish, there are like 230,000. In Greek, 150. Lithuanian, about 10,000.
The language is an issue, and I think that most Hispanic people recognize that to get ahead, they learn English. The economics of it is clear to them, and especially as with all immigrants, the kids will learn it much faster than the older people.
Briefly on that point, in volunteering at my son's school, I've had several of the English as second language students there, and they don't get very much time for instruction. And you have to admit, it's nice if they learn English, but it's a little easier to help them learn it if someone says this object is apple in Spanish, this object is apple in English. It's a lot easier to associate with someone's speech and language and you have time for instruction. One of the things that struck me was we got a handout from the school, I guess about a month ago, that had the question on it: is ESL important? Should children in kindergarten have that? Should children in the older grades? It was as if it was optional. I don't understand how it's optional when we have this vast population moving to this state, and we really need to help them, come along and also to learn for ourselves. I mean, I would like to learn Spanish, at least enough to say, hello, may I help you, or help a woman who's being abused by her husband find out there's help. That would be important.
I like reading the letters to the editor in our local paper, and in the same spirit, I like getting those emails of Darwin Awards. myth that our grandparents, our great-grandparents, when they came here, they somehow checked in their language at the door and went to work learning English. And if anybody's been to Ellis Island, this isn't like a discussion of God. The physical evidence is right there that political parties taught immigrants to get their votes. The ballots were printed in New York in 14 different languages. It has never been the case that people were asked to immediately learn a language. Businesses taught. They had their own night schools in factories. Now that it's no longer our immigrant forefathers, and it's people coming from one country, all that's forgotten.
Like this, and reading some, which is the proper word,
I don't know what the proper word is.
tell me, I need to know. Authors have helped me, look into this issue as well. I've noticed the power of language in politics to frame an issue. For instance, people of Mexican descent coming into, say, New Mexico, Southern California, Texas, Louisiana, are called illegal immigrants. And I kind of understand one end of that. The other end of that is this. Their ancestors lived in those places for hundreds of years before we established that border. It's interesting.
When you were talking about what our community can do, I thought back to about a month ago when I was helping to coach my daughter's soccer team at one of the local city parks. And the girls were doing throw-in drills and kicking drills, and all of a sudden I noticed that the group was sort of migrating, and very errant balls were kind of going in the direction of a group of, these are 10-year-old girls, and a group of about 18 or 19-year-old Mexican boys. And the girls started trying out their Spanish and kept kicking balls over there. I have a very optimistic attitude about how the next generation is going to deal with the influx of lots of
Do a lot better than us.
And just like I'm just saying people came from business. And you're right, they didn't speak it. But this country didn't, and they had to, in fact, one of my grandparents never spoke. But nobody accommodated anybody with driver's license or you had to, if you wanted to do anything, you had to at least figure out what you should write down and get somebody to write it down for you. And I just made us so angry over the fact that my grandparents had to deal with English and had to stay in the community because they didn't have the function. So I'm still angry in a certain way. I'm saying, why can't everyone do it? And it's fine, but they do.
Okay.
Well, just mention our son William, Flora, and myself, which are all Hispanic, have found a wonderful home in your community, in our community. So I wanted to just say thank you very much for that. I don't know if we can say right. We've been in town since 1976, so we're not part of the new immigrant community. Okay? We found a wonderful home here. Number two, about the issue of language, I think that we need to realize that we are a bilingual country to state. There's only 2 countries in the entire world that have more Spanish-speaking persons than the United States. Only Mexico and Spain. We are the 3rd largest Spanish-speaking country in the whole world. So I think that Spanish, we're in a bilingual society, and I don't think there's any way we're going to back out of it. And number 3, probably the biggest single issue we have, Hispanics, is the immigration issue. 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court had a ruling in which they denied the basic right of union organizing to the Hispanic non-documented workers. Hispanic non-documented workers have been fired in California because they were trying to organize a union, and the Supreme Court ruled that he had no workers' right whatsoever because he was not entitled to his job. That opened a whole host, like this large group of non-documented Hispanic workers, which are here because the economy needs it, have no workers' right whatsoever, from sexual discrimination to the minimum wage or anything like that. So I think that the civil legal issues we as a community could do is to really try to help this issue of immigration, because each day becomes a more and more critical issue on the undocumented worker situation.
I have the privilege of working with Hispanic families in their homes. I go to homes and work with moms and babies. And the issue of language is very important because women are kept from it. They don't learn English. They're not. In fact, their husbands don't want them to. Often, it's not always the case, but so it's hard for them to learn it. Number two, I've been learning Spanish for about 6 years, and it can be done. The issues that I see, medical, there's no insurance. Most of the people who come here don't have insurance. There's a lot of health problems. Diabetes is a big one. The problem of literacy is another big one. If anybody can work in any of these fields to help, first of all, a person learn to read anything would be a big help. Working with the children in the schools. Their parents they may have had a second grade education. They need help with for their children to get a foothold in education and then to be able to make progress. There's so many things that we can do, little things that will really make a difference, and the community is wonderful. They are so open, and it really helps if you learn a little bit of Spanish because you meet them. I mean, and it really, I recommend it to anybody who is willing to make the effort.
Sure, I just want to say a couple of words. 6 years ago, I asked our minister at the time to get more active with the Neighborhood Ministry Council, which was working with the Hispanic population. By the way, we have over 20 different countries represented here in this county. The largest number of Hispanics come from Guatemala. But it was interesting that at that time, the minister said that they were not interested. I worked for 2 years with the Assembly of God and Calvary Baptist Church and First Presbyterian to help set up the Living Water Center down off Sprague Street, which provides free dental care and free medical care for the Hispanic and other populations in that area, not just Hispanic. Anybody can go. I felt at the time, I served 5 years on that council, I feel that we really need to do something. I feel that we, no mas can we sit back and say we're going to think about it and do something. These other churches are already in there, they're already working, they're working with Casa Guadalupe and all the others, and I think we really need to do something. I think we need to say no mas to doing nothing.
And let us continue this conversation and our actions, which speak louder than our words, after this service. Let us now join in singing song number 315, This Old World.
Give if you give yourself truly to the nonviolent struggle for peace and justice, you will find that people give you their hearts, and you will never go hungry and never be alone.
Let us
So-
turn to one another